Everybody, welcome back to the Calibrate Tools and DIY channel. Guys, I'm out in the field today on a job of sorts, and I'm pretty far away from my studio. So I figured I'd go live out here in the field. Hope you guys don't mind. I'm in my vehicle. I was going to put a background up, but it didn't look right when I put the background up out here. So, it's kind of fuzzy around the edges. So anyway, guys, hope you guys are having a good week. And this should be public. This should be a public live. Hope you guys can see me. So that's why I'm going on a little bit early today. And so the title of this live, guys, is The Infamous Wealth Gap. Is home ownership the key? Yeah, guys. So I've, observing all the current events and the tumultuous times that we live in, and I guess you could say that about any particular time in the past or in history. That it's tumultuous or things are going on. Things are always going on, right? I started to think more about, wealth and securing wealth as a hedge against all the stuff that's happening now. Money doesn't solve everything, but it definitely helps. And then it led me to thinking about the infamous wealth gap. I'm sure you guys have heard about the wealth gap, especially in the context of this country. And if I'm sweating, guys, that's because it's hot out here. You know what I mean? I got the windows up because of traffic. I don't want all the noise to disturb us. So bear with that. If I'm glistening a little bit. So anyway, it got me to thinking about the wealth gap, and in the context of the West, you cannot divorce race and from that, from any conversation about the wealth gap, because race it's been one of the cornerstones, I think, of the wealth gap itself, right? Look how this country was founded. It was founded on the suppression of certain peoples, African Americans, Native Americans, and all of that, and all the way up to today. So we have this wealth gap. And by the way, the wealth gap has not closed for African Americans, in spite of the wealth that you may see exhibited in the African American community more so than other times. The wealth gap has actually gotten wider, and that's another phenomenon that's very interesting to study. But another thing I noticed outside of the race conversation, and as it pertains to the wealth gap, is that there are certain patterns, no matter where you are in the world, right? That any wealth gap, whether you're in America, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in Africa, whether you're in Asia, it doesn't matter. There are certain patterns that they exhibit themselves all the time when you talk about the wealth gap. For example, it's usually a small concentration of people that hold the wealth or have the majority of wealth in any particular nation, country, or continent, right? And that's usually around 10%. It's not always 10%, but it's usually around 10%, 10 to 20% of the population that seems to have a grasp on the majority of wealth in that country. And I ask myself, why is that? Why is it's always this smaller concentration of wealth, and everybody else is like peons, right? It's really no in between. It's like there's no middle ground. There's no middle class. It's like the rest of them have like 2% of the wealth in that country, right? 2 to 5%. And it's very interesting how that plays out. So, me, I dove into the research, and I didn't do any extensive research, but I was just kind of curious, right? Why is it this way? Let's see here. Let me see if I can dive into some things here. Let's tackle the United States, for instance. Let's tackle that before we talk about anything else. Here we are. Okay, let's see. Okay, bear with me for a second, guys. Wealth inequality and the 10% rule. Have you guys ever heard of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, which states that the like 20% of the population, in the context of what we're talking about right now, 20% of the population controls roughly 80% of the wealth, and that Pareto principle, that 80-20 rule applies across the board when it comes to all kinds of things, right? 20% of the people, they provide 80% of the value, therefore they amass 20%, 80% of the wealth. That's you can, that there's the analogy there. Or 20% of anything is responsible for 80% of the results of anything else. That's pretty much stating that everybody else are kind of like useless eaters. I wouldn't say they're useless eaters, but it's that small percentage of any group, right, that provide the most value to any particular use case, for lack of a better term, or any particular environment. There's a small percentage that provide the value in that environment. And why is that, guys? Why is that? Well, since the Pareto principle seems to be a universal law or rule, that would explain a lot of things, right? That would explain away why there is a wealth gap in the first place. But it does not excuse, right? It does not excuse how value. It doesn't excuse why the means by which the wealth was attained. For example, in the United States, right? The only reason the United States was considered a superpower or an economic behemoth in the past is because many people think, oh, it's because of hardworking individuals and all that. No, it was the United States got wealthy because they had 250 years, at least 250 years of free labor, right? To fill their coffers. Imagine having people work for you for free for 250 years, and I mean, come on. Of course, you're gonna amass a lot of wealth there, right? And then all that wealth that you have amassed, you can now leverage that on a global scale, and that's exactly what the United States did. But you also have a population that's very divided, right? Because of that 250 years of oppression, and you have a population that never got their just due, right? And they're constantly trying to catch up, but the gap is so wide that it's I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's going to take a long time, right? If the people that amass that wealth does not want to remedy the situation. And that's one of the reasons that I kind of started to think kind of deep on this, is because you think of the U.S. The U.S. purports itself to be the land of the free and home of the brave, and all that stuff, and equality, but it's not about equality here. It's not even about equity. It's about keeping that wealth gap in place, right? As a matter of fact, equality or equity is seen as oppression from the top down, right? Because if everybody has is on the same level now, that's really going to bother a lot of people. Okay, and it just is what it is. So is America really dedicated to closing the wealth gap? I think not, because if it wanted to, it would have paid reparations to certain peoples, right, to at least remedy the situation and at least solve some of the problems that we face today. But that's like a pipe dream, waiting on that. I'm not really a proponent of waiting on somebody to fix things when they're not going to do it. I'm more of a proactive type of person, where I say, okay, look, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So what are you doing now to remedy your own wealth gap? Okay, and that's why I included home ownership in the title there, because home ownership is one of the ways. It's not the only way. It's actually not even the best way, actually. But for a lot of people, it's the only way, right, to help to remedy that wealth gap, or help to bridge that wealth gap. All right. So some of the reasons why home ownership is a way to do that. Let's look at it here. Equity growth and appreciation. When you get a home, yeah, you got a mortgage and all that stuff, but you're actually building equity over time. The longer you stay in at home, if there's not a big hit to the real estate market, and nothing's guaranteed, but it's one of the more stable ways to build wealth for the average person, because you build equity over time. You can borrow against that asset that you have, even though it's not really yours, because if you stop paying taxes on it, guess what's going to happen then? But the ability to borrow against an asset is one of the hallmarks of capitalism. One of the good things about it, right? And it's not all about whether that home is going to generate income for you over time. Wealth can also be defined as not just money in the bank, but the ability to be able to access capital. And a lot of us have, a lot of people, I should say, the only way they can access capital is with what they have, is with their home, right? That's how they send their kids to college. That's how they, they're responsible. They're gonna, they're gonna borrow against it responsibly, right? If they really need it. You don't want to be irresponsible, taking first and second mortgages out on your home for irresponsible stuff, right? Then you're just gonna put yourself in a bigger whole debt problem. So it's all about being responsible with these tools. But once again, home ownership, equity appreciation, equity growth is one of the ways to build wealth for the average person here in the United States in this capitalist system. It says home ownership is also a hedge against inflation. It says home values tend to keep pace with inflation, helping to preserve your purchasing power. I think because of the supply, or I think it's demand more than the supply right now. So the prices of homes have, they're pretty up there. Not to mention the interest rates have, are not what they used to be. So that's one of the ways people can, hedge against inflation as well, is by owning a home. Then you have monthly payment stability. Fixed rate mortgages offer predictable monthly housing costs, unlike potentially rising rents, making budgeting and long-term financial planning easier. Well, once again, as we saw with the subprime debacle that happened back in 2000, was it 2008? You have to be responsible as well when you get these mortgages. Everybody's not going to get a fixed rate mortgage because they're not educated, right? So you have to be responsible with what kind of mortgage you get. So you won't be hit with like a balloon payment at the end of, or whenever they, decide that they want all their money. So that's one way that home ownership can keep you afloat, is the stable monthly payments. Tax benefits. Homeowners may be eligible for tax deductions on mortgage interest and property taxes. Okay, generational wealth. That's the one thing about home ownership that I would say that would pique my interest the most, is the ability to pass it down to your offspring or whoever. And that that comes down to ownership once again, right? You can't pass if you're renting an apartment, you can't pass that down either, right? So it's at some point you have to own something to be able to pass it down or keep it in the family, right? And that's how you build generational wealth. Let's see what else here. Forced savings. Making mortgage payments builds equity and acts as a form of forced savings. Forced savings is always good, guys. It's always good in any form or fashion. If you're forced to save your money, and if it's in the form of a mortgage payment, hey, why not? You're building wealth along the way. All right. But once again, like I said, home ownership, there are benefits to it. I just read those to you. I just explained some of that to you, but it's not it's not necessarily the best way. It comes with some drawbacks. Let's look at the risks and drawbacks of home ownership here. Significant upfront costs, right? You got to have a down payment for this home, right? Not all the time. If you get into one of those programs where it's no money down, like I think they got some FHA loans that are no money down. You gotta qualify for those. You gotta look for those. But generally, you have to have a down payment. Okay, not just a down payment, but you can there are things called closing costs that can that can be substantial as well. So you gotta understand that. Maintenance and repair expenses. This is a biggie right here. A lot of people think, oh yeah, I own a home now. Well, actually, in a lot of ways, you own a liability, right? You own not only an appreciating asset, right? Like I explained earlier, you build equity over time, but in a lot of ways, you also own a depreciating asset. It's a physical thing, and physical things decay and break down over time. Not to mention, you gotta, if you have a yard with trees and all that, you gotta pay for the landscaping, the tree cutting. You may have to, pay for like the plumbing. If you got any kind of issue that comes up with a home, you're gonna have to pay for that. You're gonna have money to be able to pay for that. You as a homeowner are responsible for all of that. Okay, so owning a home is almost like owning a business in a sense, right? In order to keep the home running, you got to be able to have a reserve amount of cash on hand to be able to handle those unpredictable things. All right, so that's one drawback. Here's another one: lack of liquidity. Real estate is a relatively illiquid asset, meaning that it can take time and effort to sell and convert it into cash. Right. It's a good way to, build wealth over time, but that's not the kind of, it's not an ATM. You can't just pull the money out and say, when you need it, right away, in other words, right? With a stock, you can sell it right away, or with crypto, you can sell it right away and get the money right there. Or with savings, you can go to the bank and get the money right out. You can't do that with a home. Okay. Market volatility. While homes generally appreciate over the long term, they can experience fluctuations and even depreciation. Like I said, especially in the short term. Okay. So yeah, it's subject to the markets. A lot of people have experienced that, especially right now. I mean, look at home prices right now. It's not really a buyer's market right now. Okay. And so you got all these things going on in the market that can really affect the wealth that you've been building up. I mean, home prices can drop. They can go up. So you got to be on top of all of that. Let me see here. Let's see. Where was I? Hold on a second, guys. I'm just going to check the chat here. Nobody's in the chat yet. No problemo. All right. Where were we here? Here's another factor. The appreciation of a home is also influenced by its location. And some markets may experience slower growth or even declines in value. So, that's kind of referring to the fact that you have to buy right. You know what I mean? When you get a home, you have to check out all that stuff. Location and everything matters. Okay. Like if you buy it wrong, you're going to pay the price later. Lack of diversification. Investing heavily in a single property means your wealth is concentrated in one asset, potentially increasing risks compared to a diversified investment portfolio. Right. Anything can happen. A tornado could come and destroy your home. Right. The insurance companies could leave the area before these storms come, like they did in California, which is very suspect. When they had the fires here, the insurance companies, it seems like they knew about it or something, and they got the hell out of Dodge. So a lot of people's wealth just went up in flames. Some people were fortunate enough to have insurance, but a lot of people, they lost everything, right? So having a single property, means that you're putting all your eggs in one basket, which you should not do. You should always diversify your assets. Okay. It says here, diversified investments. Investing in a mix of stocks, bonds, and other financial instruments can provide stronger alternatives and greater flexibility than solely relying on real estate. High yield savings accounts. These accounts can offer a safe way to earn interest and keep your money accessible. That's a whole other conversation, guys. We know there are other financial instruments to help diversify your wealth allocation. Okay. But if you're going to stick to real estate, like home, multifamily is also another way to diversify, right? So yeah, home ownership is a good way to help to close the wealth gap, but it's not the only way, guys. There are other ways I think that are more valuable in terms of just owning a home, right? Building businesses, I think, is one of the best way to close the wealth gap and insulate you from this quote unquote wealth gap. Instead of trying to compete, just build within your own community. Help to circulate the dollar within your own community. That's what I preach all the time. Okay. Learning how to build your own communities from the ground up, right? So you won't have to depend on others to come in and do it for you and be beholden to them. You don't want to raise a generation of white collar people, right? You need the trades taught in your communities. So if you do have to go out there and get you a big plot of land to start your own town, your own village, whatever you want to do, like they did in the past, everybody did it. That's how America was built. But if you need to do that to protect yourself from the ravages of capitalism, then you need to know how to swing a hammer. You need to know how to use those power tools. That's why I teach what I teach on this channel. Okay. That's the key right there, in my opinion, to be able to close the wealth gap. So you won't even have to worry about a wealth gap if you have your own, right? If you have your own. So let's see what else we can discuss here, guys. Let's get kind of out of here. Alrighty. Yeah, so let's talk about the racial wealth gap. The racial wealth gap. So once again, guys, you cannot talk about the wealth gap in the United States without talking about the race. Whether it makes you uncomfortable or not, it's not going away. It is what it is. This is how things were structured. So you have to understand, right? Understand what's going on here. It says the racial wealth gap between black and white households in the United States is substantial and persistent, with white households holding significantly more wealth than black households. This gap has been widening and is influenced by historical and ongoing systemic factors. Yeah, guys. So, once again, you may get on social media and you may see, people flashing their wealth, talking about how rich they are and everything. But if you really look at the numbers, right, really study what's going on. Why is the wealth gap widening then if you see all this? So don't take what you see online as the truth, or really an accurate representation of what's really going on out there in the world. Okay. What's the magnitude of the gap? White households typically have several times more wealth than black households. For example, one study showed that in 2022, the median wealth of white households was $284,310, while the median wealth of black households was $44,100. That's about six times more wealth. Okay, that's absolutely abysmal. Okay, that should make us really shake our heads and say, look, this is absolutely not how it's supposed to be. All right? Why should you be comfortable with numbers like that? That should kick you in the butt to get out there and figure out in your own way, right? Nobody says you have to save the world, but figure out in your own way how to contribute to closing that gap. And right off the top of your head, you should say, well, man, I need to, we need more businesses of all kinds. We need to support are business owners of all kinds in the community, right? If you're in the community and you're not supporting the business owners in your community, or the ones that are trying to get off the ground in the community, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're contributing to the wealth gap, and that goes for myself as well. All right. Relative wealth. What is that? In some years, the typical white household has been reported to have 8 to 10 times the wealth of the typical black household. Average wealth, the gap in average wealth is even larger in that respect, okay? Let's look at some of the factors contributing to this failure, I should say, of capitalism. But I guess in other people's eyes, is the success of capitalism. Depends on your perspective, right? There's a historical disadvantage, I should say. The legacy of slavery and discriminatory policies like redlining and limited access to education and employment opportunities has created significant barriers to wealth accumulation for Black Americans. Think about this, guys. You had African Americans going to war since this country has started, fought in the Civil War, went overseas to fight in the World Wars. You have the Tuskegee Airmen, not to mention the countless soldiers who have gotten, after they died, many years after, recognition for their gallant and heroic efforts in these wars on these others these battlefields across the world, only to come home to be spat on, lynched, discriminated against, redlined. Think about that, guys. If anybody's a patriot, it would be Black Americans, right? They would be the most patriotic, because imagine that, coming back from wars, fighting wars for a country that never loved you and does not love you, and treating a country that treated their POWs better than they treated you. Yeah. You want to talk about patriotism? Talk to an African American war veteran. All right. So you got the historical disadvantage of that, redlining and limited access to education, employment, all that. All this contributes to the wealth gap, even to today. Intergenerational wealth transmission. White families tend to inherit wealth, which provides significant advantage in building further wealth over generations. Yeah, and I know there are going to be those individuals that say, "Oh, I never had anything handed to me." But in general, okay, this is what happened. Discrimination in housing, lending, and employment continues to hinder Black Americans' ability to build wealth. And guys, as I read this, if you are an African American, this should say to yourself, well, okay, we know all about this. What am I doing, or what are we doing as a community to insulate ourselves from these things that still exist today, that still hinder us today, right? You need to spend money and support your own business, people in your community that have businesses. Circulate the wealth in your own communities, okay? But everybody wants to be a Lone Ranger and get on the internet and talk about how rich they are and how much money they've made, right? It's just absolutely ridiculous. Unequal access to resources. Black families may have less access to financial resources, educational opportunities, and business loans, limiting their ability to build wealth. Yeah, so these are structural issues, guys. I mean, you know, how can you build, right, if you don't have access to business loans, access to capital, access to wealth, educational opportunities? Your schools are underfunded, right? All these things contribute to the wealth gap that I'm talking about right now. Okay. Home ownership is a significant component of wealth accumulation, and disparities in home ownership rates between Black and white households contribute to the wealth gap. You know, I've seen, overheard. How many of you have heard of stories of Black families that want to sell their house, but they're told to take their pictures down or nobody's going to buy it? This is what we're contending with here. This is what we're dealing with here. Okay. Debt. Black households may face higher debt burdens, including student loans and other forms of credit, which can hinder their ability to build wealth. That's why I say if you're going to go to school, make sure that you're going to school strategically, not just because somebody said that's the best way to go. That's the best way to get yourself in debt. And instead of building generational wealth, you're building generational debt. Okay, and that's what happened. Okay. Learn a trade. Go learn a trade. Go pick up those tools. Learn a trade. You can always go to school as well while you learn a trade. Right? That way you have tools to dig yourself out of any financial hole, because you have a skill now that you could also pass down. You know, you can pass down physical assets like houses and land, which is great, right? But being able to pass down to your offspring skills as well, those are assets as well, okay, that nobody can take from you, right? As long as you're breathing, if you have a skill, no tornado can come by and take that away from you. No racist person can come by and take that away from you. You can go anywhere and use that skill to build, and you can pass that skill down to your generations, just like they have generations of carpenters and plumbers, you know, first generation, third generation, fourth generation plumber, whatever. That's the importance of learning a skill, guys. Okay, and not going into so much debt to learn it. Okay, some of the consequences of this gap, this wealth gap. The wealth gap limits economic mobility for Black families and perpetuates inequality across generations. Yeah. Exactly. That's the whole thing. Another way of saying generational wealth is economic mobility, right? The more limited you are in terms of finances, the more limited your economic perimeter will be, I should say, right? And that's basically what that's saying. And it's all by design, guys. Okay, it's not like people don't know what's going on. It was designed this way. That's why you have housing projects, right? You ever look at a housing project? Looks like it's like a prison, doesn't it? It has gates around, metal gates around it. All the units look the same, but yet, you know, you think you're free just because you're not in an actual prison, right? But you're in this housing project with with very limited resources, and educational opportunities. Unless you're an athlete or you have some kind of, physical skill, maybe you'll get out of there. That's one way to exploit your community as well, is by taking the athletes out of there, right? Vulnerability to economic shocks. Black households are more vulnerable to economic downturns and financial crisis due to their lower levels of wealth. Exactly. Wealth can insulate you from economic shocks. Just think about it. If you have one blanket on, that may shield you from the cold, but if you have 10 blankets on, you may not even feel the cold. Well, it's the same thing with wealth. The more money you have, the more that money can insulate you from a lot of things, poverty being one of them, economic upheavals. With money, you can leave the country or you can go start somewhere else. Without money, you're stuck where you're at, having to deal with the famines and the food shortages and the the grocery store shelves empty and all that stuff. Look what happened with the pandemic. Remember how the shelves were all empty in the stores? That's just the tip. So having having a robust financial blanket, I should say, to be poetic with it, it's what should be strived for. And some people think talking about money and having money is like you're being worldly and fleshly, and it's not all about money. That's another ignorant worldview. That's actually what keeps you poor. That's what keeps you at the bottom of the economic ladder, because you equate wealth and money with evil. No. wealth and money is actually a spiritual thing, right? Everything, it's all energy anyway. It's just how you use it, right? If you're hoarding wealth and you're not sharing the wealth, then yeah, you know, it's not the money that's doing it. It's the person behind the person that's hoarding the wealth, right? That's creating this gap because of how they want to design society and engineer it for their own selfish benefits. Um, so that's don't get caught up in that, right? To talk about building wealth is actually um, what should be done on a daily basis, guys, because this is what insulates you from the evils of the world to a certain extent, right? Oh, let's see. Where was I, guys? Where was I? Health disparity. Yeah, this is a big thing right here. Health. The wealth gap contributes to health disparities as wealth provides access to better health care, nutrition, and living conditions. So as we see here, guys, wealth, you got to have it. I'm not saying you got to be a billionaire. That's not what I mean when I talk about wealth. But you have to have enough to be able to comfortably take care of your health needs, your food needs, and your living needs. Okay, the basics of what we all need. Right at the bottom of what is it? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's shelter and food and other things. Right, these are the basic needs right here, and wealth provides that. Right, and if you're living in a system that seeks to limit your ability to gain those things, then what kind of system is that? Well, we all, look, we all live in a system where that's that's the main focus is capitalism. Okay, and we have to know how to navigate this system, which means that we have to think about wealth all the time. How else are you going to take care of yourself and your families? Okay. Social stratification. The wealth gap exacerbates, that means it makes worse social stratification and inequality, affecting various aspects of life, including education, employment, and political participation. I was listening to the story of this lady. I'm not, don't quote me on this, but basically she was an African American lady or person of African descent. I don't know. She went on this cruise or something like that, and it was her and her mom, and there was a couple there that could not for the life of them understand why she was even there, to the point where that couple, it was a white couple, that they threw a temper tantrum and spit on her. Okay, I think at one point they spit on her, or she said she went in the hot tub, and they were in the same hot tub, and they actually kicked water in her face. Okay, and said all these things to her. That's what this is talking about right here. Okay, social stratification. And I don't, by no means I want to say that wealth is going to insulate you from some of the most abject forms of racism. It won't. You could be the most wealthiest person in the world and still experience that, right? That's an inner spiritual malady, a disease within those people, that no amount of money will fix that, right? But what wealth can do is make you not give a damn, right? That's what it can do, right? And so yeah. All right, so let's see here. Efforts to close the gap. Many believe that closing the racial wealth gap requires addressing systemic issues like discriminatory policies, unequal access to resources, and intergenerational wealth transmission. Okay, we all know that already. Some advocate for policies that specifically address the needs of Black families, such as investments in education, affordable housing, and entrepreneurship. Well, I talked about the entrepreneurship side. Um, we already have affordable housing. Okay, unfortunately, a lot of us see that as a crutch, and I think that was a way to further divide the Black family, because in a lot of these policies don't want the male to be in the Black man to be in the house with the woman, and that creates a sick and distorted form of husbandry from the government, right? The daddy is the government now, and it really has warped a lot of the minds of our people, right? Um, the women especially, right? Because now they have guaranteed money coming from the government under one condition: that man can't be in the house while he's out there being incarcerated in record numbers. If you go to the jails, guys, if you go to the jails, you will see that the majority of the population, the jail population, are either African Americans or Hispanics. Okay, that's not an accident, by the way. Okay, guys, if you're sitting up here ignoring that, and you're one of those people that say, "Well, don't commit crimes," you aren't. You do not have my respect at all. Okay, and they love to throw out those crime stats. Oh, you create the most crime, you commit the most crimes, not understanding that most of the crimes that in these stats, the people were vindicated of these crimes, so they were arrested under false pretenses by a racist law enforcement system. Point blank, period. Okay, and so it's just another trope that's thrown at you, and so I don't want if you're one of those gullible people, then we know what time it is. Okay. All right. What else? Wealth redistribution. Wealth redistribution. Some proposals include wealth redistribution measures, such as tax policies that redistribute wealth from the wealthiest to those with less wealth. Oh, now you want to, yeah. Now that's really going to be an issue for people, right? They don't want that Robin Hood type of mentality when it comes to taking money from them and giving it to those who are less wealthy. That's why they uphold this wealth gap, right? That's why the wealth gap still exists, right? They don't want to take responsibility or take accountability for why it exists, the sources and the reasons for why it exists. They want to keep it in place. Promoting home ownership. Efforts to increase Black home ownership rates and address the racial disparities in housing can help close the wealth gap. Okay. So yeah, guys, those are some of the reasons why the wealth gap exists. And is home ownership a way of closing that? I would say it's one of the ways. It's a start, right? It's a start. But I would say ownership of businesses, building businesses in your community, going out of your way, going the extra mile to spend money, right, within your community. That's the way to go. Everybody else does it. Okay. Quit trying to fit in. Spend money with your own community as much as you can, and help. Forget about the wealth gap. Start fresh within your own community. Build your own community here. Okay. Yeah. So back to that 10% in the Pareto rule, 80-20, right? As I was talking about earlier. That's all over the world, by the way, right? There's a wealth gap in Europe. There's a wealth gap in Africa. Like I said, there's a wealth gap in Asia. So you find that pattern all over the world, except, like I said, within the context of the United States and the West, race has a lot to do with it, the history of it all, and why it still exists. Okay. Um, I always take it back to the, learning how to build the infrastructure first, right? The actual physical infrastructure of a community starts there, right? That means you have to know a trade. You have to learn the trade, right? You have to know how to lay the foundation of the buildings. You have to know how to plan the cities. You have to know how to do all that. If you're gonna go to school for that stuff. If you're really trying to change what's going on out here, right? If you're really trying to insulate yourself from all the ills of society to at least a certain degree, right? That's what you have to do. Okay. And I'm going to leave it at that, guys. If you appreciate this content tonight, well, just go ahead and subscribe. I teach about tools, how to use them all the time. That's how I contribute to society in my own way. I also have some basic tools that you can get for your own household, right? Check it out, calibrate.com. It's right there. That'll be a good way to support the channel and, make a better world, make a better society. Okay, guys? So thanks for listening. I appreciate you, and you have a good one. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you on the next one.